This video is for my college illustration students, but if you are a coloring book enthusiast, I think you're going to enjoy some of the rabbit trails we're going to take in this discussion. An opportunity to think about possibly doing some freelance work on the side, even consider this as a viable option. I'm going to run through kind of the history of coloring books, some of the controversies, some of the kind of niche markets that people have found in the coloring book industry. First of all, coloring books used to be a pretty big thing. Coloring books quickly transitioned from being kind of general theme books to franchise books. So most of the coloring books that are sold are licensed books by Disney, Sesame Street, various TV shows. It's really difficult for a coloring book to compete that is a general theme about trains to compete with Thomas the Tank Engine. It's very difficult to make a cartoon duck coloring book and compete with Donald. The one good thing about licensed coloring books is typically the franchise is very particular about the quality of the book itself. When Disney's behind something, they want their character to be consistent. They want the art quality to be at a certain level. That's good. I mean, it's a coloring book. It needs to have big open spaces to color, but the representation of the characters and even the settings, horses, all the different artifacts and things that are going to be part of the story will be at a certain level. I get this from illustrators. Sometimes they talk about, well, when I'm in a slump, between projects, what are some things I can jump into? Coloring books might be a possibility. First of all, here's an example of a couple pages that I did for a local restaurant called Penguin Point. In my research work for a small comic book for this same restaurant, I was dialoguing with the manager of a sports team close by, and I was basically just getting permission to use one of their licensed characters, and he was excited about me jumping and doing some kind of activity or coloring book for them, and I passed on it because I'm plenty busy. So you could look at the businesses in your area that are kid-friendly and make connection with them, whether it's restaurants, barbershops, roller rinks, and basically, suggest that you make some kind of an activity book or a coloring book. And this would be the kind of thing that it's a one-time purchase for them, that they buy it and they could print it. If they find that too complicated, you could take care of all of that side of it. And then they could reprint it as often as they want. You sell them the full license to it, and it's theirs. One of the things that's interesting is when you feel like you understand a genre, you feel like you understand that marketplace, how it can redefine itself. And one of the ways coloring books was redefined a few years back was adult coloring books. So these books that were coming out to lower the stress level of people. Coloring books for spiritual reflection, exploring sneakers or fashion, or a trip to the countryside. This whole other market came into existence that was, it's possible that adults were coloring in coloring books for children, but suddenly a whole new marketplace developed for adults, for these kind of stress relief, or just kind of a way for them to participate in maybe being kind of artistic without the threat of not being good at drawing. As we're exploring this idea of coloring book, keep in mind that the whole activity page part of it can be a very interesting part of it. So you can always go to the store and just start looking through activity pages and see what other people have done, but you also can invent your own new approach. Of course, we're familiar with mazes and dot to dots and so on, but there's always possibilities, and I think it's interesting to see what they'll do to cereal boxes, where pop up and cut out and build things out of the box itself and so on. But what are the possibilities of what you can do with a coloring book activity page? I remember as a kid, the pages, they would come as more of a 3-ply paper, but you would punch things out, and you have the whole paper doll thing. But you also could make like the covered wagon or the horse that pops up and so on. You'd have to be sensitive if it's in a coloring book that you make it work for the newsprint that it's printed on. So, and also if it is for children, remember their special scissors, their ability to cut things out. So you always have to be sensitive to the target audience that you're working with, if it's for adults or children, and their capabilities. You don't want to frustrate them as they're trying to achieve these activities that you've created for them. Educational material in this form of kind of a coloring book page will probably always be a part of education, even if it goes to things being colored digitally on an iPad. The artist is still required to create the material in a similar manner that they've always done, whether you're counting 3 squirrels and coloring them in orange, or if you're coloring in the New England states on a map. The artist is still required to help create a lot of that content material. So let me throw a project at you that could build a residual income for you. So you're living in North Dakota, Alaska, wherever you're at. You simply start doing some research work on the history of your community. That width is up to you. I live currently in Indiana. Do I include the whole northern Indiana area, or do I just include my county? That would be completely up to you. I could have a great time with this, right? You do this historical research. Sometimes good places to look are even like Ripley's Believe It or Not type books, where they're really looking for kind of sensational things in addition to the standard fodder that you might explore in a history lesson. So you do your research and you come up with your 30 pages of material. You illustrate that out, and you can go back as far as you want. You can explore celebrity personalities, the sports teams in your community. I can't imagine living anywhere in the world and not being able to pull off 30, 40 pages of very interesting historical information. You create the book, then you look for sponsors. So rather than you publishing this book, or that it's competing against SpongeBob somewhere, you actually find sponsors that will pay for the book, and then the book gets distributed in elementary schools. And possibly you cycle it. Either you publish just enough books for four years of classes, or you reprint. But each time, your payment comes from these sponsored companies and the publishing. The schools pay nothing. You show up, you do a little talk to the kids. You're doing a history lesson for the kids. They all get a book to take home. And you do that every 4 years. So kindergarten through 3rd grade, and you cycle through. So it's that time again. You show up, and you contact the principal, and you show up to distribute your coloring books and do your little talk if you want. This is the kind of thing that, again, once you do the work, and it depends on how much time you spend on the historical research, but I mean, a good artist could knock this project out quite quickly. It would be the logistics of getting things printed, storage, finding sponsors, and so on. But if you're decent at sales, you should be able to pull that off. You'd have to crunch the numbers and look at the amount of time it takes, storage, printing, and so on, to kind of figure out the fiscal viability of this and its benefits. You'll need to look at the cost of publishing the book. Obviously, with volume, if you buy a lot of copies, your price goes down. You need to crunch numbers, look at how long would this project take you, what would be a reasonable amount to ask from sponsors, how many sponsors do you look for this. If you are a child that enjoys coloring books and you've been watching this video, the next material is not so much for you. This is more the critical thinking side of it for my college students. The coloring book industry had the ability to redefine itself to include adults, and the industry benefited fiscally from that. It also then could redefine itself in terms of theme material. So we're going to explore this side of the coloring book industry. This is the critical thinking side of the class and of the material. You're going to have a chance to kind of process this and think through, Do you agree or you disagree with some of the choices that are made by artists and publishers and their target audience? Some of the material you might find a little disturbing. That's okay. That's kind of the nature of art. And I think maybe what makes this even a little more awkward is the fact that the coloring book has been traditionally viewed as been only for children. So when you see some of this content material, it's just hard to process this as being for adults only and not include children. So this made the news a while back that the Catholic Church released a coloring book to educate kids on how to avoid pedophilia. And they created a coloring book that taught them kind of steps to be aware of.
Our next story, some may see as a step forward in the fight against pedophilia. Others might think the Catholic Church is going a little too far here. The Archdiocese of New York is handing out coloring books that warn little kids about sex predators. Included in this coloring book is a guardian angel warning children against being alone in a closed room with an adult.
There's a whole genre of coloring book biographies that have been coming out. I haven't been able to get to the bottom of this one, but the Black Panthers supposedly put out a coloring book. It is disputed as to whether the Black Panthers actually released this, but it was very charged. The Tea Party put out a coloring book.
Basically, this is a social activist coloring book designed to teach children, educators, and parents throughout the United States about the actual Tea Party movement itself.
Books have been put out exploring terrorism and 9/11.
Now at 9, this 9/11 coloring book. We just talked with the publisher earlier on Now at 9 and asked him if a coloring book that shows the Twin Towers in flames is really appropriate for kids. He said yes. He said it's a teaching tool, and it's not meant for elementary kids. It's meant for kids who are a little bit older.
Tonight's talker asks what is appropriate material for a children's coloring book. We're used to seeing titles like Letters and Numbers, Butterflies and Birds, but the same company that published those coloring books just published this one. It's an anti-terrorism book called The True Faces of Evil. Would you buy it for your little one? The publisher says a lot of parents will. The book is part 2 of a series called We Shall Never Forget 9/11. This one focuses on the details of terrorism and terrorists. Kids can color faces of Muammar Gaddafi, Saddam Hussein, and the current presidents of Syria and Iran. There are caricature-type images of jihadists and a picture of the Twin Towers on fire. The book also has what it calls terrorist trading cards that it says can also be burned, fed to rodents, or shot at for target practice.
And of course, all assorted topics of things that you wouldn't publish for a child. So I grew up coloring in Bible story coloring books and Christian coloring books. And soon after, Florida released some material to children in the public schools. The Satanic Church created their own coloring book.
The Satanic Temple has a new coloring book that it's trying to distribute to school children in Florida. And while you are showing these, I'm going to be reading the later text ones. So just go through these pictures. You're seeing obviously the cover there.
It looks very satanic at all. That looks lovely.
It will. Yeah, there's the devil is in the background. The coloring book features cartoon children performing satanic rituals and drawing pentagrams.
Is this from The Onion?
No, as far as I know, it's real. The Satanic Temple. It has a word search for words like acceptance and friends and a maze to reach the Necronomicon, a fabled occult spell book. The children in the book wear satanic symbols on their shirts and spread anti-bullying and religious tolerance messages. A coloring page features a girl reading in a study filled with satanic art, books, and symbols.
Before you actually create a coloring book, you'd want to Google it, because you will find just about every book has been created at some point that deals with obscure sports to life in the day of being a fireman. So there are a lot of books out there. And it doesn't mean that you couldn't create a book that is the same topic, you just want to make sure it's better, right? I was talking to a student who was an art therapy major, and we were talking about this idea of maybe doing some type of an activity book that people could work through, not just coloring in patterns as a way to lower stress, but to work through art therapy concepts in a book. Quite frankly, if you have any interesting interdisciplinary ideas, or you're a double major in something else, for you to pull in some of that enthusiasm energy into something like this could be interesting. It's a possibility. If nothing else, someday, if you're an artist, you could offer it as free material on your website that people could download and print. I've been described as a gerbil on a wheel because I'm always running, I'm always moving, there's always something to do, there's always possibilities. And so for you to be an illustrator who is between jobs and feel like there is no possibilities of anything to do, it's just simply not true. There's always something you can be doing. This is one of many things, and you never know for sure which of these little kind of side hustles that you do will take off into something interesting. Keep the creativity in the artwork, but also keep the creativity in the studio plan and the studio process of trying to explore out possibilities. And when you go to the store and you're shopping online and you're looking at ideas and things as a creative person, you're always weighing out what do I engage in and what would be what could be a part of my studio practice. We're going to close out with these coloring book corruptions. So this is just a fun little exercise for you to do. You basically take other people's coloring book pages and their work, and you cut it out and you glue. You can even gesso the back of it so you could paint on top of it, use watercolor. But the idea is you take it's kind of like working with found objects. So you take their images, but you create your own. And so here's just a few I did with some secondary students. If you look this up online, you'll see all kinds of peculiar and interesting solutions to this. It's very interesting to take 20 artists, give them all the same material, X-Acto knives. They cut out, they glue, they color. What do they come up with? Is it humorous? Is it tragic? Some of you may notice there's not necessarily a huge difference between ink work that's done in something like a comic book and coloring books. The key really is, leaving enough space that the person can color. And quite frankly, I remember the first time I looked through these adult coloring books, I was amazed at how little space they left. It really is pretty much like, it felt more like mosaic work, Islamic patterns and so on. I mean, you really didn't leave a lot of big open space. You have a lot of freedom in terms of your line work and how you handle it. So it's possible that maybe the new breath of fresh air into this whole idea of digital coloring or coloring books and so on would be how you handle line work and your style, and pushing away from maybe how things have been handled traditionally. So we've talked about a lot of different things here. We've talked about how coloring books originally were kind of general narratives, and then they moved towards licensed products, and how TV and licensed franchised characters kind of dominated the marketplace. And we talked about how the marketplace was able to redefine itself with adult coloring books to lower stress. We've talked about how educational material will always kind of have a relationship with these kind of activity and color pages. And then I threw some ideas at you of ways that you could do some kind of small side hustles for yourself. So I talked about my restaurant coloring book pages, talked about different ideas for you of how you could do some work for local businesses. And then I also talked about if you wanted to do a larger project that could possibly earn residual income, that you could do a big historical project of the history of your community, and that could be republished multiple times. And then we talked about the critical thinking side of the coloring book and how it's been used for politics. And you could go back to Germany, Nazi Germany, and how the children's literature was used as propaganda to influence the kids. And I didn't want to go into all that. The critical thinking side of like, where are the boundaries of how a coloring book should be used for children specifically. But then we also then explored the coloring book and all of its different facets. And then I ended with this idea of coloring book corruptions that you could just have some fun with. It's a little controversial when you start working with other people's art. My mentor, Don Baum, went to the flea market or whatever and bought paint by numbers that were painted by, first of all, the paint by number is created by another artist. And then they're painted by consumers who painted them, and then he appropriated them into the Domas, into these like birdhouse kind of creations. And then he exhibited those in Chicago at an exhibit and sold those. So, and they became his art, right? So there's an interesting tension. So with these coloring book corruptions, there's that same tension. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, hit like and subscribe. Thanks.